Are you ready to uncover the hidden truths about our very first human ancestors if you've ever wondered how we Homo sapiens came to be? Then you're in for a treat because today we're winding the clock back a staggering 2.5 million years. Imagine, if you will, the vast, untamed plains of East Africa. Picture a landscape that's both breathtakingly beautiful and brutally unforgiving. It's here in the early Pleistocene epoch that a truly remarkable story begins to unfold. A story of a hairy bipedal ape, a creature that would unknowingly set in motion a chain of events leading directly to you sitting there, watching this video right now. This wasn't just any old ape, mind you. This was something special. This was Homo habilis, and with their emergence, the world, as we knew it, or rather as it was then, was about to be transformed beyond all recognition. The name itself, Homo habilis, translates rather fittingly to handyman, and that's precisely what they were, the original tinkerers, the groundbreaking innovators, the very first species to truly earn the genus name Homo. For nearly 1 million years, these incredible beings would call the sprawling plains and savannas of eastern and southern Africa their home, living in complex social colonies. They were in essence our earliest human ancestors, the pioneers, who took that crucial first step on the path towards us. Life back then, let me tell you, was no walk in the park. The prehistoric African plains were wild, fraught with peril at every turn. It was a brutal existence where life was often short, sharp, and incredibly dangerous. Yet Homo habilis, with an undeniable resilience, not only persisted, but thrived. And from within these determined groups, certain individuals would eventually branch off, taking another monumental stride closer to the sophisticated world-shaping species that we are today. In this deep dive, we're going to peel back the layers of time to understand exactly how these curious early apes lived, how they evolved, what they looked like, where they settled, and ultimately how their journey came to an end. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our in-depth documentary on Homo habilis, the very first species of human. Now, let's play a little thought experiment. Shall we imagine for a moment plucking a Homo habilis individual from their world 2.5 million years ago and dropping them right into our bustling modern-day high street? Pop a smart suit on them, give them a pair of sensible shoes, and let them take a stroll. What do you reckon would happen? Well, I guarantee you they'd turn more than a few heads. While some of the later human species, like our close cousins, the Neanderthals, might blend in a bit more with a good haircut and a bit of styling. Homo habilis was unmistakably the very first rung on that human ladder. They were, if you like, the original prototype, the foundational design that would eventually lead to the likes of Homo sapiens, Homo neanderthalensis, and Homo denisova. Those three iconic human species that dominated the late Pleistocene Ice Age. No, Homo habilis lived much, much earlier. Their domain was still very much confined to the sun-drenched plains and savannas of Africa. An adult male Homo habilis, for instance, might have reached a height of around 5 feet, certainly taller than their predecessors, but perhaps a tad shorter than the average height of a modern human today. And when it comes to their appearance, think less clean-shaven modern human and more ape with a distinct lean towards humanity. They were almost certainly very hairy, much like the genus of ape that came before them, Australopithecus. In fact, there were many shared facial characteristics between the two, making it clear where Homo habilis had sprung from. Their arms, for example, were still notably long, wonderfully adapted for climbing and swinging through trees, a vital escape route from the ever-present dangers lurking on the ground. You see these early humans in their quest for the abundant rewards of the open grasslands had ventured beyond the relative safety of the dense forests. But this new bountiful environment also came with its own formidable array of wild animals, predators galore. So being able to scramble back up into the branches at a moment's notice was often not just a good idea, but an absolute necessity for survival. Despite this lingering arboreal connection, Homo habilis likely spent the vast majority of their time walking upright, a truly defining characteristic. And they weren't just shuffling along either. They were even capable of breaking into a speedy run and sustaining it for much longer periods than any of their ape predecessors. This strongly suggests that Homo habilis' legs were significantly longer than any previous ape species, enabling groups of them to cover considerable distances across the African savannas, constantly on the move in search of food or new territories to call their own. But ultimately, if you were to spot a Homo habilis on that hypothetical modern street, it would be their face that would truly set them apart from the crowd. They still possessed many primitive human features, ones that were yet to fully develop into the faces we see in the mirror today. For starters, their cranial capacity, that's the volume of their skull indicating brain size, was less than half of what you'd find in a modern human. This resulted in a noticeably narrower forehead eyes that were set higher and a smaller, more ape-like back of the skull. Their nose was much flatter than ours, with large forward-facing nostrils, and their mouth that still protruded forward, quite significantly an undeniable telltale sign of their ape ancestry. All in all, this was a creature that was remarkably different from the apes that had come before it. But let me tell you, it wasn't an easy journey to get to this point. As we're about to discover, the ancestors of Homo habilis likely faced even tougher odds. As we touched upon Homo habilis, the very first species in our own genus, Homo evolved from a fascinating genus of bipedal upright walking apes known as Australopithecus, which literally translates to a southern ape. These Australopithecines really accentuated those ape-like features that were still prominent in Homo habilis, particularly around the face. They were almost certainly even hairier, their mouths protruded even further, and their brain cases were smaller still. Crucially, they were highly adapted to a life lived amongst the trees. Australopithecus were the trailblazers, the very first apes to walk upright for extended periods of time, and as they slowly but surely evolved towards Homo habilis and their future kin, the focus increasingly shifted from life in the canopy to a complete adaptation to life on the ground. So which specific Australopithecus species were the likely candidates for leading to Homo habilis? Well, the scientific community often points to the famous Australopithecus afarensis. You know, the species that Lucy belonged to, or the slightly lesser known Australopithecus sediba. Both of these species began to decline and die out just under 3 million years ago, a critical period when one particular branch of one of these species would begin its evolutionary journey towards our very own Homo habilis. Now scientists will tell you it's incredibly difficult to pinpoint the exact moment when the Australopithecus genus gave rise to the Homo genus. It's a bit like trying to find the precise spot where the sky meets the horizon. It's a gradual transition. Before Homo habilis' momentous discovery in 1964 by the legendary trio of Louis Leakey, Philip Tobias, and John Napier, it was widely assumed that Homo erectus, a much later species, was the direct successor to Australopithecus. But Homo erectus was a significant evolutionary leap, a much more obvious departure from the Australopithecus form. So when Homo habilis burst onto the scene, it became abundantly clear that another crucial piece of the human evolutionary puzzle had been slotted into place. But what precisely caused one of these Australopithecus species to evolve into Homo habilis? There's the million-dollar question, and it's been the subject of intense debate and fascinating research ever since Homo habilis was first discovered. The prevailing theories often circle back to changes in food sources or the environments in which these apes lived. Perhaps the very trees that Australopithecus and its ancestors relied so heavily upon became more sparse, forcing them to descend to the ground, and in doing so become more adept at walking upright. Or maybe, just maybe, certain species adapted to feed on entirely different foods. Many early upright apes, including Homo habilis, were omnivorous, meaning they ate both plant matter and meat. And perhaps these food sources became more readily available on the ground, further incentivizing that shift away from an arboreal lifestyle. Now, while Homo habilis was officially announced and described as a new species in 1964, the very first tantalizing whispers of its existence were unearthed years earlier, deep within the Olduvai Gorge. This truly significant paleoarchaeological site in Tanzania is a treasure trove of ancient human history. It was here during an expedition led by the remarkable Mary and Louis Leakey from Britain that two fossilized teeth were discovered. These teeth belonging to an adult ape bore an uncanny resemblance to those of a modern human. And as time went on, the Olduvai Gorge would prove to be an increasingly fruitful location for unearthing more and more fossils from this incredible new species. The very next year, a partial skeleton was uncovered in the gorge belonging to a young Homo habilis male. From that point onwards, successful expeditions became commonplace, today thanks to a wealth of different fossils, including teeth, entire skulls, lower jaws, lower leg bones, foot bones, and several partially complete skeletons. We have a remarkably good understanding of Homo habilis' anatomy, and what these bones tell us is absolutely fascinating. They reveal so much about how these creatures may have lived, how they adapted, and how they interacted with their dynamic Pleistocene environment. Take their hands, for instance. The bones of the hand tell us that these apes would have been capable of a precision grip, allowing them to firmly grasp objects. This wasn't just a random development. It was directly linked to advancements in their brain, which in turn enabled these creatures to develop the groundbreaking ability to produce basic stone tools. But we'll delve into the incredible world of their tools in much more detail a little later on. It's the contrasting lengths of their legs and arms that offer another crucial insight. While Homo habilis was undoubtedly a creature that could readily walk upright, those still elongated arms tell us they were equally at home, scrambling through the safety of the trees. This, combined with the shape of their jaw and skull, further reinforced the notion that they were in fact more closely related to the Australopithecines than initially thought, and their teeth in particular showed clear evidence of creatures well on their way to evolving into something much more like us. Their teeth were remarkably similar to ours, with one notable exception: their incisors. These were still relatively long and sharp, bearing a distinct resemblance to those of a chimpanzee or a gorilla, and perhaps most profoundly considered the brain case of Homo habilis. As their brains expanded, so too did their skulls. The approximately 600 cubic centimeters of brain matter housed within these apes caused their skulls to bulb out and become more rounded in the process. To put that into perspective, their brain made up a significant 1.7% of Homo habilis' total body weight. a remarkable statistic, especially when compared with the apes they evolved from. Homo habilis was without a shadow of a doubt a truly significant discovery. This was plainly a creature more advanced than the Australopithecine apes it succeeded, yet still too primitive to be considered a member of the later Homo species. Unsurprisingly, Homo habilis would go on to become a very controversial species amongst some scientists. Some even debate its very existence, claiming that it was synonymous with Homo rudolfensis, another fascinating creature with whom it shared the open plains of Tanzania. But regardless of the debates, their impact on our understanding of human evolution is undeniable. First and foremost, it's absolutely crucial to highlight that Homo habilis is widely believed to have been one of the very first users of early stone tools within the genus Homo. Now, it's true that the Australopithecines, those more primitive species we discussed earlier, were already employing the most basic of tools, perhaps a simple rock to crack open a nut, or an animal bone to dig for roots, even before Homo habilis came along. But our Homo ancestors, they took it to an entirely new level, laying the foundational groundwork for what would eventually become the sophisticated machinery and intricate tool use we see in our modern world. Homo habilis is most famously associated with a specific type of stone tool industry known as the Alduin. This prehistoric grouping of tools is easily identifiable by their remarkably simple nature and sharp, effective edges. These weren't just random rocks, they were purpose-built, primarily used for skinning and butchering animals or for breaking into tough carcasses to access the nutrient-rich marrow within. Alduin tools share several distinct features. They are generally rounded at one end, designed for comfortable gripping, and sharpened at the other. Crucially, they lack any extensive evidence of complex design or intricate production. They were in essence functional, rather than artistic. So how exactly were these Alduin tools made? Imagine a Homo habilis individual, perhaps gripped by hunger, picking up one stone in each hand. Then, with deliberate force and an understanding of the material, they would strike them together, causing sharp chips of stone to flake off the intended tool, sharpening it in the process. It's a testament to their budding intelligence. The Alduin tool industry and the specific names given to the tool specimens recovered are derived directly from Tanzania's Olduvai Gorge, that same key site, renowned for harboring the remains of Homo habilis individuals. The pioneering British paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey, who lived from 1913 to 1996, was instrumental in the discovery and naming of this area, and many of the stone tools unearthed at the gorge show compelling evidence that some of these primitive men and women genuinely knew what they were doing. These Alduin tools weren't just accidental rock fragments, they were precisely that, tools specifically crafted for a desired purpose. This in itself represents a massive leap forward in intelligence for these prehistoric apes. The clear evidence of flaking and chipping patterns on the stones at Olduvai Gorge allows us to confidently deduce that the Homo habilis individuals who made them understood the principles of creating a sharp edge. We know from the very existence of these tools that these individuals possessed the cognitive ability to strike stones together at precisely the right points to make them flake off into a sharp point. This would have required a comparatively high degree of intelligence, far exceeding anything seen in the animal kingdom before them. At the time of their arrival, Homo habilis were without doubt the most intelligent animals that had ever evolved on our planet. A new dawn was truly breaking, not just for the animal kingdom, but for the world itself. What we can tell, however, is that very little in the way of complex creative design went into constructing these older one tools. There's no evidence that with their basic slicing and cutting tools, Homo habilis were capable of constructing anything more advanced than a simple protobiface. This was an extremely early form of knife, a rudimentary cutting implement that would much later evolve alongside its creators to become something far more sophisticated, perhaps a deadly spear point or a highly efficient slicing knife. This limited tool repertoire strongly suggests that Homo habilis was unlikely to have been a hunter of large game. We know from the general structure and build of their bodies and teeth that these early people were indeed supplementing their vegetarian diet with portions of meat. But they would have had very limited means of obtaining much of it without the opportunistic help of the local area's more formidable predators. Of course, it's entirely plausible that unlucky or unwary small animals, or perhaps even bird eggs, could have been caught with their grasping hands, which remember were equipped with those powerful opposable thumbs, but they simply lacked the capability to bring down bigger prey, such as an antelope or other ungulates equipped only with a simple stone-cutting tool. Therefore, it's sensible to assume that the majority of meat in Homo habilis' diet came from the carcasses that had already been brought down by other carnivores. Much like the vultures, they shared the early Pleistocene plains, where they were for the most part scavengers. Still, the very fact that these tools existed at all implies that Homo habilis possessed some fundamental understanding of simple mechanics in one way or another. It's surely a strange, almost eerie thing to picture, isn't it? Imagine the majestic big cats of the African savanna retreating away from a fallen antelope after gorging themselves only to be cautiously shadowed by a family of skulking Homo habilis. Creatures so close, yet still so far along the path to Homo sapiens, clutching their newly fashioned stone, cutting tools, perhaps grunting to each other with their underdeveloped vocal cords. The very same basic vocal noises that would one day lead to me presenting this very video you're watching. It's a truly humbling thought. However, there's something else quite remarkable that was discovered. In 1962, 2 years before Homo habilis was officially discovered, a truly strange circle of volcanic stones was unearthed in the Olduvai Gorge. Measuring over 4 meters long by 3 meters wide, these stones were firmly planted into the ground, spaced evenly at just over half a meter apart, and standing at about 30 centimeters in height. This was without a shadow of a doubt man-made. No other species known to science at the time could have possibly put together such a structured, evenly spaced arrangement of particular stones. Mary Leakey's compelling theory on this structure is that some sort of early hominid used these rocks to support a pole or some kind of support system, possibly to create the most basic of primitive shelters or windbreaks. Imagine a rudimentary structure to guard these creatures from the relentless pouring rain or the blistering heat of the Tanzanian savannas. These stones, if Leakey's theory holds true, represent the oldest known form of architecture known to humankind, and while incredibly basic, they laid the very foundations for the towering skyscrapers, magnificent monuments, and all the other intricate structures we see in the modern world. To this day, it remains unknown which specific species of early human made this structure. However, due to the age of the rocks and the precise location where it was discovered, it has very often been associated with Homo habilis. This, if confirmed, revolutionizes our understanding of these early creatures, the way they lived, and the incredible workings of their minds. One other important point to consider about Homo habilis' lifestyle and behavior is the fascinating potential practice of monogamy. They may even have been the very first human species to adopt this social structure. We know that Homo agaster and Homo erectus, two species which succeeded Homo habilis, are known to have mated for life or to have had one partner at a given time. But it's speculated that this practice may have actually begun with their habilis predecessors. The communal structure that Homo habilis lived in has previously been compared to that of baboons, where multiple males coexist in a group with multiple females. Some of these groups may have numbered anywhere up to 80 individuals at one time. A formidable troop, the males, it's believed, would band together to defend the troop from rivals or attackers. This defensive behavior may have involved Homo habilis individuals raising their arms, perhaps throwing sticks or stones and repeatedly screeching at predators or rival groups to intimidate them and scare them off. If, however, this didn't work, Homo habilis would quickly retreat to the relative safety of the trees, using their still elongated arms to grasp branches that would otherwise be hard to reach for their more ground-adapted descendants. The open savannas were, after all, a new and inherently dangerous habitat for these apes, and danger could have been lurking behind any tree rock or patch of tall grass. The savannas of Africa in the early Pleistocene weren't all that dissimilar in terms of landscape and biome to the vast grasslands of Tanzania we see today. Imagine tall yellowish-green grasses stretching out as far as the eye can see across a dramatic open landscape, punctuated only by the occasional cluster of trees or scattered rocks. Denser forests would have existed on the fringes of these mighty plains, and winding rivers would have still cut through the land, providing a vital water source for these early humans. But as time marched on, the Homo genus was becoming less and less adapted to a life in the trees. Their brains were growing, they were truly learning to walk and run permanently on their own 2 feet, and they were adapting to new food sources that thrived in the great savannas of Africa. Nature, in its relentless wisdom, was gently but firmly pushing them towards the plains. But they were by no means the only creatures out there. In fact, Homo habilis wouldn't even be the only species of hominin occupying the savannas. At least 4 other hominin species, 3 of which belonged to the genus Homo, would have coexisted with Homo habilis on the Tanzanian savannas at the same time. And this was just the first time throughout prehistory that such a remarkable cohabitation would occur. Homo agaster, Homo erectus, and Homo rudolfensis would have all been present throughout the time of Homo habilis. But these are all incredible creatures that we'll be covering in far more detail on this channel going forward, so do make sure you're subscribed. Ergaster and erectus specifically were species that actually succeeded habilis on these plains, and are in fact more closely related to you and me than their comparatively primitive cousins. But there was another creature that Homo habilis would have undoubtedly encountered on those plains, one uncannily familiar to its Australopithecus relatives, Paranthropus boisei. Sometimes this creature is even referred to as Australopithecus boisei, due to the extreme similarities between the genuses. These imposing figures were likely to have inhabited wooded wetlands or forests closer to the fringes of the savanna. Bulky, hairy, and bipedal, just like the Australopithecus, from which the habilis had evolved, it's entirely plausible that groups of Paranthropus boisei could have encountered large troops of Homo habilis as they wandered close to the fringes of each other's territories. What did they think when they met? Did they recognize each other as relatives, perhaps? Or did they just acknowledge them and slink away into the woods? We may never truly know, but the thought itself is incredibly powerful. So where did Homo habilis get the meat it's so relied upon for its balanced omnivorous diet? The answer, as we touched upon earlier, can be found in the unfortunate corpses of antelopes and horses, creatures remarkably similar to the zebras and gazelles that populate the plains in vast thundering herds today. These medium-sized ungulates would have been brought down by larger, more formidable predators, leaving behind a feast for the opportunistic hominids and vultures to scavenge from later. But it's perfectly feasible to assume that all manner of creatures provided meat for these resourceful apes. Any large animal that fell or passed away on the savanna could have been picked clean. Perhaps Homo habilis consumed turtles or fish from the rivers when they could catch them, or caught small rodents or birds' eggs from the ground, or even from up in the trees. They were in essence making the most of whatever the harsh African landscape offered. However, and this is a crucial point, even though Homo habilis was taking those crucial first steps towards truly conquering the grasslands, they were by no means at the very top of their ecosystem. Individuals who strayed too far from the group youngsters or the older and wounded would have needed to be extra cautious when doing just about anything in Pleistocene Tanzania. For there were numerous threats lurking in the shadows, just waiting to claim an unwary early hominid. The Australopithecus before them experienced it, and so too did Homo habilis, active predation from larger, more powerful creatures. The savannas were absolutely teeming with large carnivorous cats. Leopards, for example, remarkably similar to the ones alive today, would have been perfectly capable of climbing trees to pick off an unwary hominin, as well as silently stalking them on the ground. And two terrifying extinct genuses of large cat were also present on these plains, Dinophelis and Meganterion. This deadly duo of saber-toothed cats in particular, Meganterion, persisted right through to the Middle Pleistocene, where it continued to pose a truly deadly threat to Homo erectus when they eventually took over the savannas. It wasn't even just the big cats that Homo habilis needed to be wary of. Africa at the time was also populated by another extinct mammalian predator that would have stormed the plains in formidable groups, the hunting hyena. Several species from the genus Chasmopothetes were present in Africa at the time our ancestors were making their first upright steps. These hyenas ran on long, slender legs, remarkably similar to those of modern-day cheetahs, and likely pursued fast-moving prey across the grasslands. Our early relatives would have been an easy catch, as these hyenas brought their quarries down with their formidable knife-like teeth. Homo habilis wasn't even safe when it needed to take a vital drink at the local rivers or lakes. Crocodiles were abundant in these areas, and it would only take a single moment of carelessness, leaning down to drink, to be ambushed by the gaping jaws of a large, carnivorous reptile, pulling an unwary ape down into the muddy, murky waters. In fact, one Homo habilis fossil even shows clear evidence of an attack from a crocodile. The front half of the foot had been consumed or torn off by the reptile, which on the Pleistocene plains of Tanzania would have been an undeniable death sentence for a Homo habilis. It's a stark reminder of the brutal reality of their existence. It's incredibly hard to provide confident, accurate reasoning for the ultimate demise of Homo habilis. It's highly probable that over the course of the Pleistocene epoch, numerous complex factors contributed to the downfall of this pivotal early species. But one compelling theory put forward by Dr. Pasquale Raia from the Università di Napoli Federico II in Italy may offer a very credible answer. Published in the journal One Earth in 2020, Raia and his colleagues used an advanced form of past climate emulator to meticulously track rainfall temperature and general climate patterns over the Pliocene and Pleistocene epochs. From their fascinating results, It appears that later Homo species began to lose access to their critical climatic niches across the world due to sharp and rapid changes in global climate. The specific environments that these early men and women relied upon began to disappear, and as a direct result, so too did their essential food sources. Perhaps the same devastating effect could be said for Homo habilis, or perhaps this was just one significant factor in a plethora of others that led to their eventual decline. It's also vital to remember that Homo habilis coexisted with 3 other species of Homo throughout the time it was extant on Earth. Particularly, Homo ergaster and Homo erectus were in comparison significantly more intelligent than the relatively primitive habilis. So it's a very real possibility that our early apes were simply outcompeted by creatures that were better adapted to living and hunting in larger, more organized social groups across the vast plains of Tanzania. It's a brutal reality of natural selection, isn't it? Whatever ultimately happened to the Homo habilis populations of Tanzania in the early Pleistocene, one thing is abundantly clear. The Homo genus's legacy does not end here. This was merely the beginning of a story that spans over 1 million years, a grand narrative that would culminate in this very moment in time with you watching this video. Other Homo species would persist, yes, but it is Homo habilis that laid the absolutely crucial foundations for them to do so. To you and I, they truly deserve their translated name, handyman. Our ancestors' early beginnings may have been a far cry from the complexities and astonishing luxuries of the present day, yet Homo habilis and the advent of its evolution represented the most intelligent creature the planet had seen to date. The very notion of a creature learning to actively change the shape of its environment to such an extent was utterly unheard of in the fossil record prior to this. If it was indeed Homo habilis that meticulously crafted that primitive stone shelter in the Olduvai Gorge over 1 million years ago, then this discovery revolutionizes our entire understanding of these early creatures, the intricate way they lived, and the remarkable workings of their minds. We still have a very long way to go on our epic story before we reach the full evolution of Homo sapiens. But it is absolutely vital not to underestimate the profound significance of Homo habilis as the true forefathers of mechanics and technology. It is impartially thanks to these truly groundbreaking early hominids that you are even able to watch this video today. It's a remarkable connection, isn't it? Thank you so much for watching. We sincerely hope you have enjoyed this brief but incredibly insightful journey into our ancestors' distant pasts, and we truly hope you'll stick around to see what fascinating topics we have planned for the future of this channel.